Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Niamh Howlin, and I'm the Dean of Law, and you're all very welcome to the UCD Sutherland School of Law this morning for what promises to be a very lively and thought-provoking discussion. I'm really pleased to see so many of our students here, and I also extend a warm welcome to the alumni and the special guests who are joining us here today. I'm delighted to welcome journalist and broadcaster Miriam O'Callaghan and the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor of the City of London, Alderman Vincent Keaveny. Both of them are distinguished graduates of UCD Law, and indeed both are previous recipients of UCD Alumni Awards in recognition of their outstanding achievements. Miriam O'Callaghan graduated from UCD in 1979 with a Bachelor of Civil Law, and then in 1981 with a Diploma in European Law. She's, of course, well known to all of us for her exceptional contributions to television and radio broadcasting, not least as the presenter of RTE's Primetime since 1996. Alderman Vincent Keaveny graduated with a BCL in 1986, and he has gone on to become a leading practitioner in the field of commercial law. Last year, Vincent was elected Lord Mayor of the City of London, becoming the first Irish citizen to hold this office. Today's discussion is going to focus on the theme of diversity in the legal and financial services professions. And we'll ask, how can we widen participation to make those professions truly representative of modern society? And of course, universities have a critical role to play in this through opening up access to education and embedding the values of equality, diversity, and inclusion at all levels. UCD is the first higher education institution in Ireland to develop a systemic whole institution approach to access and inclusion. And our objective is to be truly a university for all. One of the 6 key values which underpins UCD's strategy is diversity. And this is also at the heart of our work here in the Sutherland School of Law. We work very closely with our colleagues in UCD Access and Lifelong Learning, including on the Pathways to the Professions project. We're very proud that now 1/3 of our undergraduate students are coming to us from non-traditional backgrounds. These students contribute hugely to the life of the law school. We really value this diversity, and we appreciate the breadth of talent, experience, and contribution by all students. We want to remove the barriers to access, participation, and success. But we recognise that there's more that we can do, and we're always open to engaging with those who share our values. I'm conscious that we've got a relatively limited amount of time today in which to discuss a very substantial topic, so I'm going to hand over now to Miriam O'Callaghan to start the conversation. Thank you, Miriam.
Thanks so much, Dr. Howlin. Thanks for that lovely introduction. I'm delighted to be here this morning with the Right Honourable Lord Mayor Vincent Keaveny. Welcome, Vincent. Welcome back, as they say.
Thank you very
Also,
much.
I'd like to welcome your parents, Vincent Senior and your mom, Phil. Thanks for being here. Look, in our day, they didn't have a Sutherland Law School. Remind me of your days in law here. Where were you? What was it like?
I'm deeply envious of the student experience here in UCD. These incredible facilities, and contrasting it to the experience over in the Arts Building, as I was here with a few of my classmates I see in front of me as well, before even Roebuck. So we were over in the Arts Building. The law school was up on the 4th floor of the Arts Building. Amazing to think that what was crammed into that space. I suppose instead of this, we were over in Theatre M, and rather more. That was probably where most of the big lectures were held. Very, very different experience. In one way, it was great in that we were right in the middle of student life, because everything, of course, at that time in UCD revolved around the Arts Building, the Newman Building, I think, as it is now. And the bar across the road. But apart from that, there was very little else in it. So everything was very much more concentrated in those days in UCD.
Now, what is your career trajectory? So we did the BCL here, and then how did you end up the Right Honourable Lord Mayor of London? Like, what happened in between?
Be careful what you wish for. Well, that's actually the point. I didn't actually wish for it. No, I was called to the bar first of all. I went to the King's Inns after that. Once I got the BCL. and had planned to start practicing at the commercial bar. That was really what was in mind, but wanted to spend a couple of years getting a bit of city experience. So went off to London early '89 and got an in-house legal job, and then just sort of began to find that I really loved life in London and loved the city, loved the opportunities that working in the commercial sector and the financial sector in London provided. It was fortuitous, the rules changed. It was a lot easier to requalify from the early 1990s onwards. So I decided to requalify as a solicitor and to spend a few years in private practice. And I've been in private practice in the city ever since. And then there was no great grand plan to become Lord Mayor. Just one or two opportunities opened up, and as I said to a few people, it's amazing if you keep saying yes to interesting opportunities when they present themselves. You just never know quite where you end up. In fact, I remember hearing Peter Sutherland saying on a couple of occasions a piece of advice his father gave him: when you're on the pitch and the ball lands at your feet, kick it. And I think what he meant by that was just take the opportunities as they come.
That's really interesting advice, because we have a lot of younger students here today. It's good advice, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. I mean, he was a fantastic example of that, indeed, in his own life as well.
Now, we all watched the incredible pictures of last November when you became the Lord Mayor. Tell me, A, when you heard you were going to be it, and B, what that day was like.
Well, I had a sort of slightly strange run up to it, because, of course, had the normal schedule worked, I would have been Lord Mayor in November 2020, but COVID came along and it's a one-year term. We decided, for the first time since 1860, my predecessor served a second year. We decided to extend his term by another year. So I had quite a bit of extra time to think about it, which has been really useful in many ways. But then when it comes, then it really hits you. Oh, it is actually happening. All this, was it going to happen? When it'll happen? And then it's happening. And that weekend, taking over, there's various aspects to the weekend. My parents are here, and they'd probably tell you about it. The silent ceremony on the Friday, which happens in Guildhall at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's getting dusky, and there's just surrounded by people, but there's two chairs with the light on the outgoing Lord Mayor, light on two beams on the outgoing and incoming Lord Mayor. And it's all done in silence, except that when I get up to make my oath of office, all in silence. Items are taken to you, touch the items. So it's the crystal scepter, which is a gift to the City of London from King Henry V after the Battle of Agincourt, because the city financed his campaign in France. So that's handed from the outgoing Lord Mayor to the incoming Lord Mayor. And then a moment when the outgoing Lord Mayor slowly lifts his hat off and the incoming Lord Mayor slowly I put my hat on, at which point authority has transferred. Wow. And then the show on the Saturday, thousands of people turning out to watch me in a gold carriage being
I'm jealous of your gold carriage.
Surreal. It was an out-of-body experience. I kept thinking, am I going to wake up and find out I was in the middle of a dream or something?
It's wonderful. Interesting you said that, because of the extra year gave you time to think, Vincent. And I know you think it's very important. In your term of office, you kind of have a motto, don't you? People with purpose. Tell us about that.
People with purpose, investing in a better tomorrow. Absolutely. There's elements to that. Every Lord Mayor, as well as being the ambassador for the UK financial and professional services and related tech sector, indeed, these days, you bring in a sort of personal focus for the year. And my theme, people and purpose, investing in a better tomorrow. A couple of elements to people, looking at skills, a real focus on future skills in the financial services sector, and social mobility. Big issue, actually not an issue I really grapple. We don't have the same sense of class here in Ireland. It's a much flatter society when you think about it. I mean, everybody in Ireland's a generation or two away from a small farm in the country, and there's that sense that there's a much closer sense of community in many ways than the experience in the UK. As a graduate recruitment partner in the early 2000s, 4 years as graduate recruitment partner for one of the city firms, began to see the real need for social mobility in the UK to be addressed in the professional sector. So I'm working on I co-chair a task force leading some work on that, and talk a little bit more about that, but also the purpose element of the year as well. A real focus on the ESG agenda, in the environmental piece. We're doing a lot of work around the COP26, post-COP26 follow-up in the financial services world. And on the S, the social element, looking at the social impact of finance. And again, significant piece of work there around something called the impact investing, finance with social impact. So that's the another strand to the year. So lots of balls in the air at the moment.
But they're all very interesting. When you mentioned social mobility, I suppose there's still a perception that law and the profession is very much dominated by white, male, middle class people. How do you shift that? And also the importance of bringing in those diverse people, because that's a huge benefit, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. A lot of research has been done which actually demonstrates the benefit, the business benefits of diversity, neurodiversity, having different views involved, different experiences brought to bear in decision making in organizations, and the importance that the real benefit, the positive impact that can have on business performance. But you're right. I mean, actually, it's not just a perception; it's a reality that the senior levels of the legal profession, certainly, and indeed the professions and the financial world, remain largely white, middle class, middle aged. Sort of people like me, I suppose. But it's true.
Yeah.
That is, and there's a lot of good things happening, bringing people into the professions, into the financial services industry, from a much wider range of backgrounds. But in many cases, for lots of different reasons, at different points, they drop out, or they don't progress as quickly. One of the reason I'm in the task force I mentioned, looking at socioeconomic diversity in the financial services sector, what we're looking at there is actually the specific issue of progression, because we've seen that while the people are coming in from non-traditional backgrounds, they're either progressing much more slowly or not progressing at all, and it's nothing. This doesn't correlate with performance. This is something just they are. We did a bit of research a couple of years ago, looked at 8 major financial services employers, and we found that people coming in from, using the technical term, lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they progress 25% more slowly in those organizations than those who came.
Why? Did you work out why that is?
As we are working on that, working out why it is and what we can do to change it.
It's interesting because I heard Dr. Howlin earlier, and I know that UCD and the Sutherland School, they're working proactively to widen participation in the professions. And Dr. Howlin mentioned Pathways to the Professions initiative. I mean, do you think universities like UCD could work more closely with the professions and with business?
I think absolutely. I think there's a huge amount. This has got to be sort of a community effort with bringing the entire all of the resources to bear. Universities and indeed getting into secondary, and actually, I think you even have to. Certainly in the UK, I think you have to go even into the primary schools. In fact, it's that pervasive that this has to be tackled all the way through the system. But the universities play a really critical role, because that's the point at which people begin to build up those networks that are really important, to begin to think about the issues that they'll have to address to navigate their way through careers. I think I'm a huge fan, for instance, of mentoring and support. Very direct, effective mentoring is a really important aspect of progression within professional services, within financial services. I was chatting the other day, we had an advisory board meeting for the task force I've mentioned, sitting beside the managing partner of Allen & Overy, and Gareth was saying to me, just thinking about his own career, said the number of times he said it came to forks in the road in his career, and he said there was an angel in my life, somebody, either a formal mentor or just somebody who just took him aside and said, Gareth, why didn't you think about this? Or actually, I'm not sure. Somebody, he said, the importance of that in anyone's career is it can't be overstated.
And on the basis, Vincent, of your own experience in your own professional life, what do you think are the main issues that you feel need to be tackled in terms of diversity in the legal and financial services sector?
That's a huge question. There are a series of issues. I think there's a number of ways I would approach it. I think first of all we need to look at the entry into the profession and to make sure that the routes in are sufficiently open and varied, that we're not restricting entry through the narrowness of the sort of the entry into the profession. And in this context, I just mentioned, for instance, graduate apprenticeships, which are developing the UK's legal and accountancy profession quite quickly. Certainly, the accountants are probably ahead of the lawyers in terms of graduate apprenticeship programs, but we're going to see it much more. We used to be able to become a lawyer or an accountant by joining the firm as an apprentice, a 5 or 6 year apprenticeship. And when I started practicing as a lawyer in London, I met a number of the senior partners at that point hadn't been to college. They had gone through the apprenticeship route into the profession, and many of them were absolutely brilliant lawyers, leaders of the profession. And in the 1960s in the UK, and I think here as well, that was closed off as an entry route into the profession, and that was a really socially regressive step, actually. And I think it impacted significantly on social mobility within the professions in England. That sort of program, which combines now the ability for somebody to join a firm, get hands-on experience, get a degree, earn a salary, and in fact leave without any student debt. I mean, it's sort of a case of why wouldn't you do it, really? Actually, when you think about it, it's a bit of a no-brainer. But it's only at this stage, it's at a very low level. I met DLA Pipers, our first 6 solicitor apprentices. I met them in our graduate apprentices. I met them in our Manchester office last Thursday night and Wednesday night last week, and was really impressed by the quality and the interest. And actually, one of them asked me a really interesting question, Miriam. It's just, should we restrict this? Should this be a sort of a social mobility tool? Should we? And I said, actually, no. Because what we need to do for this really to work is that middle-class parents actually think it's absolutely fine for their son or daughter to do that in contrast to going through a traditional degree course, a direct degree course into. So we need to see the two as being equally valid and equally valuable. That's
a great idea, because I was doing an event the other day, and there's an obsession about going to college, and not everyone needs to go the traditional route.
You need to come at it in a different way, and that's why the graduate apprenticeship program can be very effective for some people. I think we need to broaden. That's one of the broaden out the routes into professions. And as I say, universities can play a key role in providing flexibility in that respect. I think the other role, it's storytelling. One of the most powerful things that we've seen in the social mobility space, talking about the challenges of it, is showing people that there are people at the tops of organizations that look like them, have the same story. And it's funny, if you're talking about gender or race, some of these things, they're visible, and there's an ability to identify very often without necessarily hearing the story. You can talk, or you can approach somebody much more directly about it and have a one-to-one conversation. Socioeconomic backgrounds are, of course, something that gets hidden over time, and certainly in England, in the professions and financial services world, it's amazing how people sort of edit their life stories, and it's not necessarily they do it because they're ashamed of something, or because it's just in many cases it's ceased to be relevant. And you get to the top of an organization, and actually where your family were 40 years ago or 30 years ago, it's not really relevant to your story anymore. You've left it behind in a way. But the importance and power of somebody in that sort of position, talking about his or her experience on the way to becoming the CEO or the chair of that company, that for other people, that's really powerful. Really,
you can't
important.
see it, you can't be it, as they say. What about the traditional culture with maybe in the traditional law firms? Do you think that's also, could that even be a major barrier to diversity?
It has been, and it's when you sort of say why we had the question a few minutes ago, why that problem? It is many. It's those networks and the culture. And most firms are now aware of that. Actually, I have to say certainly most of the bigger firms that I talk to, the managing partners are really conscious of the fact that they need to create a different sort of culture of inclusion within their firms. And a lot of them are doing really, really good things in that respect. And lots of affinity groups that working so that people can work and feel welcome in from whatever background, gender, race, ethnicity, whatever it is. That all these little things change culture. But I think coming back to the mentoring point, the other thing was this: it's the reverse mentoring, and mentoring, really good mentoring sort of works both ways. And actually the number of senior leaders in financial and professional services organizations I've talked to who now have reverse mentoring arrangements in place and have learned an enormous amount from that, from people, from more junior members of their staff. And again, that really helps to transform a culture of an organization as well.
Yeah, it works really well. We have a lot of students here in the audience today. It's great they're all here. What advice would you give them, even in terms when they go into the workplace, in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think the thing to do is first of all, to be yourself. I mean, and actually bring, it's that whole thing about bringing your whole self to the office. I wouldn't start by editing out bits of your story or personal. Be yourself. Bring your entire story to the firm and to the organization that you're joining. And if you find that the organization should respond positively to that, and if it's not responding positively to that, that's a problem for the organization, not for you. I think that would be my take on that these days. But talk to people, certainly if you're looking at future employers. Employers now are very conscious of the demands made by prospective employees, and one of the things, you're in a great position to influence the culture of a firm and the outlook of a firm by just talking about your aspirations and what the values you're seeking from an employer. And I wouldn't shy away from having those conversations. It's as I've done thousands probably of graduate interviews, and the interviews where you get into that sort of dialogue with a prospective trainee solicitor, they're great interviews. They're really rich, powerful interviews when you have that sort of dialogue, when people are challenging you about the values of your firm, interested in the values, and seeing whether it's an organization that they feel that they will be able to have a fulfilling career in that environment. So I'd bring yourself into the space and be yourself when you're in that context.
Great advice. I'm now going to throw it to our audience to ask the Lord Mayor questions. Who would like to be the first questioner? People are always shy at first. Yeah, thanks so much.
You mentioned that you became a barrister. We've been talking about this would you not think that in terms of physical barriers to maybe people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds coming into the law profession, would sort of the process of deviling and having to do 2 years of unpaid work, would you not think that that's a really big barrier? Because you have to come with enough money going into it to be able to support yourself for 2 years, or be able to work a second job or be a professor or something at the same time.
It's good question. It's a huge issue. Absolutely, it's a huge issue for the bar. Certainly, and the bar in England and Wales is very conscious of that. Most chambers in England, and there is, of course, the difference in the UK with the chamber system. You have an ability, of course, to fund the deviling process, to actually support junior barristers in the early period of their career. Most barristers in chambers will contribute towards that, and so there is an access and an ability to support a social mobility objective within the legal at the bar in England. And the Inns of Court are very conscious of it as well. They're working very hard. One of the nice things that happened recently, an honorary bencher at Gray's Inn, and I know Gray's, for instance, does an enormous amount in terms of both outreach to get to make a career at the bar more visible to those who haven't perhaps considered it, coming from non-traditional backgrounds, but then to provide tools such as scholarships and bursaries to make pursuing that career a possibility early on. Now, those are models, and I'm not sure. I don't want to be critical of the bar here, but I think there are. I'm not sure that the bar here. I'm looking at one or two of my classes. I'm not sure the bar here is at quite the same place. And part of that, however, is the chamber's structure in England makes it a lot easier to put arrangements of that sort in place.
Very interesting. Great question, by the way. Next question over there. Leighton. We're going to give you a mic. Yeah, no, she definitely, I can tell you. Excellent. Great experience.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Karen Banks. I'm a graduate student here. A little bit in the same line of the first question. I'm old enough to remember the campaign against what was called the new system for the training of solicitors when I was a student here in my undergraduate course a long time ago. I think it was 1978. I was part of the campaign against the introduction of the new system, precisely because it was going to be elitist. You couldn't any longer go through what I had known, i.e. people who did apprenticeships. They managed to become solicitors without going to university. But the consensus of the great and the good at that time was that without a degree, you wouldn't be a proper lawyer. That, I think, is the justification for the new system. And I ask myself how realistic it is to think that in marvelously conservative Ireland, we're going to be able to put that into reverse gear. I'm a bit pessimistic, I have to say. It's also, of course, true that even under the old system where you had the two parallel tracks, getting an apprenticeship was tough for someone from a working class background. You know, I mean, people from middle class backgrounds were more likely to know a solicitor or to have the possibility of, I had to pay my parents.
Well, I was going to say, I think a lot of, absolutely.
£500 was the fee. Yep. But even if that wasn't a problem, you know, just having the acquaintanceship, having the contact, so that's always going to be a problem. But like, what are the chances of going back to the old system?
Good question. What are the chances?
Well,
zero, probably.
Well, I don't know. I mean, what I can say from sort of what we're doing, I'm looking at what we're trying to do with the profession in England. If we can demonstrate the success of graduate apprenticeships in the legal profession and indeed in the accountancy profession, where it's a similar sort of issue, to be honest about it, then I think there'll be a real model for the Irish legal and accounting professions to look at as well. I think if we, and I suspect what you'll see. The accountants have been leading on this in England, and I think if the big firms, if the PwCs and Deloittes and EYs are pushed forward on that agenda in accountancy, I think they'll probably drag the Irish accounting profession along with it. And if the accounting profession goes, you'll probably get the lawyers coming as well. I mean, so maybe there's some hope there that if we can build up a bit of momentum with success in this program in England, that we'll be able to, through the connections, the professional connections, which I'm here talking about and that's one of the great things. That's why I'm here for these few days, is talking about those fantastic connections between Britain and Ireland, between Dublin and London. Maybe we can use some of those connections very positively for a social outcome like that.
Sounds actually great, positive. Yeah, question.
Hi, my name is Vivian and I'm a final year law with economics student at UCD. I just wanted to highlight an initiative we have at the Sutherland at the moment. It's a module called Law in the Classroom that I'm studying at the moment. And basically, we go to primary school students in DESH schools and visit them weekly and teach them about the law to promote diversity. We also kind of carry out different exercises with them, and ultimately we're going to try and carry out a mock trial with them. So far, we've received a very positive response from the children, but a few of them are still quite intimidated by the idea of a career in law. So my question for the Lord Mayor is, can you offer any suggestions on how we can promote diversity and how we can further demystify the idea of law as a career choice for these children?
That's a great question, I have to say. Well, I think I'll probably come back to the point we've just been talking about visibility and people seeing that some of those youngsters seeing people a little bit older than them, but not too much, that they can recognize something of themselves in them. Actually, I think that just doing that is so important, that they actually have that visibility, and they feel, yeah, if you can do it, then maybe I can do it. And the other thing I'd say actually, and is to try and make it fun as well. And actually, it sounds like you are doing that.
Yeah.
Having a fun mock trial, engaging people in that. Actually, that's making it fun and enjoyable. I think it will also help hugely too. So well done on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. It's in Dash schools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Vincent. Is this on?
Yeah.
Yeah, introduce myself. You know me well because I'm one of your former classmates. My name is Suzanne Egan. For everyone else, I'm Associate Professor of Human Rights here in the law school and running the module on law in the classroom. I'd like to salute my students because they certainly are doing a fantastic job as role
Right.
models, and they make the classes really a lot of fun for the children. So it's a great adventure that we're on together. My question, it would be remiss of me in my role as an Associate Professor of Human Rights not to ask you a question on the following lines. The theme, of course, is opening up the marketplace, but my question is slightly off-piste and it's about closing off the marketplace. I wanted to ask you, is there any way that you can use your position as Lord Mayor of the City of London to help or encourage efforts to restrict or stop access by Russian oligarchs to their London-based wealth?
We're very, I mean, Suzanne, thank you. It's a huge issue at the moment, as we're all aware. And I should. We're sitting here having a great conversation, talking about really important topics. But actually, when you look at what's going on in Ukraine, it is absolutely awful. It's an extraordinary sort of atrocity at the moment. So I think everybody would unite our sort of thoughts and prayers with everyone who's suffering in the face of the Russian invasion at the moment in Ukraine. We are very conscious of it. There's a lot around. We're looking to working very closely with the British government, with the EU, and with the other authorities at the moment to strengthen the sanctions. And financial services sector is very, very involved in the process of putting new sanctions in place and doing that quickly, while at the same time avoiding some one thing we're trying to manage and avoid is unintended consequences, because there are some unintended one in terms of the sanctions not being effective, but also innocent victims of sanctions. And so there is an element of making sure that the sanctions don't have some unintended consequences that affect those who shouldn't be affected by them. But the sanctions need to be pretty tough. My view is that the perception is probably there's a big perception, and a lot of that is around property, and indeed say around the other big areas, crypto. So another real area of concern, which is largely an unregulated space. And I would hope one of the things that comes out of this would probably be just internationally. I think one of the interesting things, the number of interesting things that's coming out of the international collaboration around this will probably be a move to much higher levels of international regulation of the crypto space, crypto assets generally, because I think that is for those who are trying to hide ill-gotten gains from whether Russia or anywhere in the world, at the moment, crypto gives them a lot of scope to do things in an unregulated sphere of economic activity.
Okay, I'll take a question here, and I'll go back up to you then.
Hello, I'm John O'Dowd. I'm a lecturer here in the law school, and I was a near classmate of Vincent's, I suppose, in college. I was earlier showing a photograph of us, I suppose, almost 40 years ago when we were still in secondary school, campaigning on another kind of social issue, I suppose you could say. My question is related to Suzanne's, because this is actually the first half of my media law lecture today. So some of my media law students are here, and I thought I might get a question in just to make it interesting for them. And it's related to Suzanne's question because there was a parliamentary question asked at Westminster yesterday by Bob Seeley of the Prime Minister, specifically in relation to the role of law firms and other professional services firms in London, not just in relation to the sanctions issue specifically, but in relation to this issue of state corruption or subversion, as Seeley was putting it, and particularly in relation to litigation. There's a coincidence that on Tuesday, the Irish government accepted proposals for reform of the law of defamation, and one of them was specifically in relation to what are called SLAPs, strategic litigation against the public interest. And so we are going to have reform here, and it's likely that the UK will follow because there's an EU, not only an EU context, but there's a wider Council of Europe context. So my question was, how do you see the law firms and the other professional services firms in London moving forward in that space, the litigation space, where there's a lot of criticism of the firms for the extent to which they've facilitated, not just Russian oligarchs, but multinationals, many others, in shutting down public discussion of the involvement of these individuals in various nefarious activities.
Thanks, John.
Yes, which is, I mean, again, a great question, a great challenge. Well, I would say the interesting thing is actually the financial and professional services sector now with the sanctions rate. I mean, the sanctions are probably the most. That is the weapon that is being deployed against Russia, primarily the sanctions regime, which means that in terms of these are probably the most effective set of international sanctions that have ever been imposed. And certainly the most comprehensive. And it's the financial and professional services that are going to have to deliver this. They are actually on the front line in terms of delivering this. And I have not in the last 10 days or so talking to a lot of senior leaders in banks and financial institutions and in law firms. I've not met a single person who has any issues or concerns. They want to be on that front line and they want to put those sanctions in place. So I think I don't think there's going to be any resistance or reluctance. Clearly, there may need to be some, as you say, John, some statutory or other legal interventions to make some of it possible, because we are going probably further than in many cases current law would necessarily would allow. But the will is there, absolutely, without a doubt. I haven't met a senior person in any of those organizations. And it comes back to the point about values and the organizations and their values. This is a point at which people actually then have to start being true to the values that they talk about in their organizations. And I think you'll find that they will be on that account.
Good to hear. Question up there. I'll take the young lady with the glasses a second in, and then I'll take the young lady on the edge. We've 5 more minutes, so.
Hi, I'm Jessica, and I'm a final year law and history student. I actually had a question regarding candidates with hidden disabilities, so people maybe with mental health conditions, and how opening up the marketplace to them could be made possible. Like, obviously, people with mental health conditions can have incredible creativity and innovation, but different companies and things might see risks of absenteeism and that kind of thing, or gaps in the resume. So I just wondered what you think could be done to tackle that.
I think again another
great question.
Yeah, no, we're sort of working. It's funny that the whole diversity and inclusion, and I think actually I tend to, you've got to emphasize the I bit rather than other. It really should be an inclusion agenda rather than a diversity agenda. And I think we've sort of been working on the more obvious and issues and the visible characteristic protected in legal terms under the Equalities Act in the UK, the protected characteristics, and working through that. But you're absolutely right that there are more invisible inclusion challenges in a way that firms have to find a way of dealing with. Some firms are being very honest. Some firms are tackling that. A lot of firms are sort of not there yet. But you are now seeing, again, some of the conversations I'm having, people beginning to think about their recruitment processes, dealing with things, as you just mentioned, things like gaps in CVs, how that tends to be something that is now screened out of processes. That isn't an issue the same way it would have been an issue maybe 5 or 6 years or 10 years ago. So people are beginning to engage with it. However, there is one other really positive development, which has been a huge shift, and I think probably that's been compounded by the pandemic. A real shift in thinking around mental health in the workplace. People now saying, again, it comes back to, in many ways, to the same point about values. We've always talked about looking after employees, employee welfare, mental health issues. I think now there's a recognition that this has to be real, and that actually there has to be processes and support in place, and we're seeing much more of that. And I have credit for that through one of the Lord Mayor's Appeal, the charity that supports Lord Mayors on a rolling basis for a period of time. We introduced a few years ago. The Lord Mayor's Appeal was actually we got an idea from PwC, which we then took over as the Lord Mayor's Appeal, the Green Ribbon campaign, the mental health, through a campaign we called This Is Me, promoting, and that's spread across the professional services and financial services sector in the UK. And I think you're seeing it here as well.
Yeah.
So, but that sort of the This Is Me campaign, which again involved storytelling, people telling their mental health story openly in a way that they would tell a story about their broken leg. To their colleagues and friends in the office. I think it's as important that people feel able to tell those stories as they would if they had gone off and broken a leg out skiing or something like that and came back and they were telling their mates about that. You know, it's got to have the same acceptability.
Totally agree with you. I'll take one last question. Yeah.
So, my name's Martha. I'm a final year law with social justice student, and my question is focusing on like barriers to the legal career and to like careers in general. So you touched on like having connections and networking, and then also when you're in interviews or when you're going for your career, that you shouldn't have to like hide who you are or like if you come from a lower socioeconomic background, that shouldn't be something that you should be afraid to disclose or to speak about. But my question is mainly focused on like the inequality in the education system and how can we have this equality of opportunity if private schools exist where people have this built-in network and they have this, and like you mentioned at the start of your address that like in England it's a lot more there's a lot more lack of diversity and it's a lot more difficult to do well because there's more ingrained inequality. Whereas I feel like in Ireland there is like through our private education system there is that same barriers that apply to people that come from like public schools versus private schools and how you can kind of counteract, because like there is this phenomenon like in Ireland, like the boys club and like all of that sort of issues and like with connections like through families. So I just how can you address that sort of issue in Ireland? Because I like personally I feel like that's a massive problem.
Okay,
like,
another great question.
I'm not sure. I've been living and working in London since 1989, so it's in a sense of where really things are today in Ireland. I don't feel I'm able completely to comment on that, but I can certainly tell you a little bit about one of the things coming out of the work we're doing around socioeconomic diversity in the UK, in London, in the UK, is around this sort of networks issue, and seeing we're recognizing the fact that you need to be able to help people build those networks and build them quite quickly through their early parts of their career. It's again just funny chatting to Gareth today, you know, about the sort of partnership promotion process, how easy it is for somebody to come into a partnership. If it's a succession case coming through as a new partner in a law firm, it's a relatively, well, there's somebody moving on and there's a success, you know, business being handed over, and but if somebody is coming in with a business case, they're developing a new area of business and the challenges of that, in many ways, it's that sort of at one level is sort of what we're talking about here, the building your own network, justifying your existence, as it were, within the firm at a more junior level. There are things that can be done, and a lot coming back to, as I say, to that mentoring point, the firm itself recognizing potential and ensuring that there are the resources around the person to give them the opportunities they need to develop positively. But I think again the early questions it comes back something to to what. As an opportunity comes up, grab the opportunities. Kick the ball. All it takes is that one. You know, if the ball lands on your feet, as I say, don't hang around. Kick it, or I suppose if you're. It depends on which sort of football you're playing. You might pick it up
and run.
Yeah, I mean, depending on. So I mean, I grab the opportunities, because opportunities do come up. And I don't let them pass you by.
Have the courage to take them. Another great question. Thanks for all the questions. Thank you, Lord Mayor, by the way, for being here today. And I'm going to hand you over now to the Dean of Law. Again, Dr. Howland.
Thank you both very much, Alderman Vincent Keaveny and Miriam O'Callaghan, for joining us today and for that really interesting and insightful discussion. And thank you all for your questions as well. You've given us a lot to think about. I hope our students will leave the lecture theatre today not only with a sense of optimism as they consider their own career pathways, but also an awareness of their own potential to help to create more equitable and diverse and inclusive cultures in their future workplaces. So thank you all very much for coming today. And I just invite everyone to show your appreciation once more for our two guests, Miriam and Vincent.
Well done.